I think we're about to see an unprecedented amount of trade activity this summer, and for this episode I'd love to share my favorite trade ideas. I'd like to start with the Pacers though, because we saw Halliburton's devastating leg injury. Not only did it kill their chances of winning that game 7, but it killed their chances of making a repeat run next year. And it also galvanized all of these fringe contenders in the East to even further dive into this concept of this being an open year with Boston and Indiana out of the picture. So that's another reason for the increased trade activity. But with Indiana in particular, it got me wondering, are they just going to sign D'Angelo Russell or something to step in for Halliburton for 1 year, sign him with the taxpayer mid-level? Because if they re-sign Miles Turner, they'll be a taxpayer team. That's probably the conservative route. That's probably what they're going to do. I would actually lean the other direction, not blow it up. You know me, I'm never going to say to blow it up. But I think they should look at next year as a bit of a gap year while also planning on making a second round series appearance. I don't think just filling in for Halliburton is taking enough advantage of this year being available to you to remaneuver and get your cap, make sure your cap doesn't get in a place that's untenable. So the first trade I have has to do with Indiana, and it's a trade that I already said should happen back around the trade deadline after the Lakers acquired Luka, and it's Austin Reaves for Miles Turner as the base of the deal. I think that this makes sense for both sides. I'll start with Indiana. I think that they need another primary ball handler to potentially take some of the burden off of Halliburton. You saw how much they were using TJ McConnell in that game 7. That's a bit concerning to me, and it tells me that Nembhard at point isn't really an option either. McConnell is 33. You start to look, if you're Indiana, at your roster at these guys that are in their 30s, and you start to wonder if we're going to have a gap year where we don't have a chance of making a finals run. Do we just move that asset now before it gets any older? And I think some of these heliocentric teams where there's a primary ball handler with the ball all the time need to figure out a plan B or a way to get them off the ball so you don't overburden them. I think that's going to be a move that most teams make, seeing all these injuries, is we need to get the usage down a bit. Even if the usage is technically the most efficient use of your possession, giving the ball to this one player, you can't just do that every time. You're going to wear them out and you're going to see more injuries that way. So I think that's an adjustment we'll see teams make. And I think Indiana's going to get ahead of the curve on this and not simply run it back next year with a replacement player and then come back in the 26-27 season. So I really like Austin Reaves for them for that reason. He's on their timeline. He's 27. His contract is easy to acquire right now, only at $13 million. You're going to have to give him an extension. I don't know how much he thinks he's worth. I think he's a $25 million player. So that's why I equate him to Miles Turner. I think they're both number 3s on good teams, $25 million players. So I see those as relatively even assets. And I think that Indiana doesn't need Miles Turner all that much. That's the other sneaky thing about this team that I noticed throughout their run. Miles Turner was sitting in a lot of big moments. They opted for Obi Toppin down the stretch of some of these games where they were making their comeback. And I think it's because Miles Turner he slows them down. He's a half-court player, and this team likes to play fast and move the ball quickly. Turner just kind of stumbles around the court, which I love Turner, but I don't think this is the perfect team for him. He fits on most teams because of his shooting and defense. But if we're talking about locking him down on a $25-30 million a year deal, you have to scrutinize their precise fit. And I think that Indiana can get away with platooning the center position. They got good minutes out of Tony Bradley. They got good minutes out of Thomas Bryant. I think they had plans for Wiseman before he went down. I would go into the season with those 3 and then planning on playing Toppin and Siakam at the 5 in certain stretches. The actual trade, I think, should be Reaves. Let me pull up the LA roster. I think it should be Reaves, Maxi Kleber, and Gabe Vincent. That gets you to about $35 million for Turner and McConnell. I think the Lakers have to throw in a swap there. I'll mention that further in just a moment. if that's assuming Turner gets a $25 million deal, McConnell's on the books for 10, so that's even there. If Turner commands 30 million instead of 25, LA can throw Shake Milton into this deal. He has a non-guaranteed $3 million contract, and that gets you pretty much right at the number that you need, and Indiana can just waive him. So that's the trade from a player perspective. I like LA including a swap here, though. I think a 2030 swap would be appropriate. The rumors are that Luka's going to sign a short-term extension to get himself to that 10-year seniority max so that he can sign that super max with the Lakers instead of trying to do that now, similar to what Jalen Brunson decided to do with the Knicks. So the reporting's going to be he's willing to accept $60 million less. That's just basically because he doesn't want that fourth year on the deal. He wants a shorter deal so he can re-enter the market at a bigger number. The bet there for a 2030 swap would be if Luka gets to the point where he has a year left on his deal or even less than that and doesn't like what the Lakers have done and asks out, that would be the upside for me if I'm Indiana. You never know what's going to happen with this Lakers team. LeBron's going to leave before then. Who knows what their ability is going to be to build around Luka after that, especially because they're going to make moves to make this team better right now. So I think this is a worthwhile swap. I don't think any firsts need to be included in this. I think, as I said, Austin Reaves and Miles Turner are relatively even value. So then you're looking at comparing Gabe Vincent and Maxi Kleber on one side with TJ McConnell on the other. McConnell is obviously a more valuable asset, and so you include the swap in there to balance it out. I think that's fair. If there needs to be another swap, maybe. I don't know. But I like this swap for both sides. To move on to the Lakers side, they have this delicate balance they have to deal with where they have to maximize their ceiling while also not giving away too much because they have to worry about building around Luka once LeBron leaves. I think the plan should be to maximize this team's role player situation, build out the roster with no bad contracts, make sure that your cap hierarchy is firmly in place, and then when LeBron retires, you plan on signing a free agent to take his spot that summer. It's really the only way this team can go about doing this. And because they don't have a lot of trade assets as is. So I think you become one of the only places, and a very attractive place at that, to sign a max free agent the summer that LeBron decides to retire. And you put yourself in the driver's seat to get the best player on the market. And whether it's a ball handler or a wing, I think both of them work with Luka. So that's the plan to me. So work on building the infrastructure around them. I think Miles Turner's the perfect number 3 for LeBron and Luka, being a 3-and-D center. It fills their starting center spot. I like the makeup of that, and it retains this package that they offered for Mark Williams, Dalton Connect in the 2031 pick. It retains that package to go search elsewhere. So that's the reason I like it for them. I think this makes a ton of sense for both sides. It makes both sides better. Indiana can start Reaves at the point, start some other center instead of Turner, and make a good playoff run next year. I think that I would pick them to win a first-round series in these circumstances. And then the following year, you have Reaves, Halliburton, and Nembhard as kind of a 3-man unit at the 1 and the 2. You have Neesmith and all these guys still. You're basically upgrading the McConnell role to Reaves as someone who can play alongside Halliburton but also back him up. So I love it. I think I was leaning towards Indiana just re-signing Miles Turner now that they made a finals run and going for it again. But now that they're clearly not going to make it again, I don't think it's necessarily prudent to keep McConnell number 1 and also to re-sign Turner to a deal that's going to make you a taxpayer team. Just kick the taxpayer thing a season down the road for when Halliburton's back and you have Reaves under contract. But the other part is Gabe Vincent and Maxi Kleber both come off your books after next season. So that helps you as well. I just think it makes too much sense. Moving on to my second trade, Jarrett Allen to the Warriors. I think the Cleveland Cavaliers need to move off of Jarrett Allen. I do not think they need wholesale changes like some are calling for after their embarrassing loss to Indiana. In fact, in hindsight, I don't think that was too embarrassing. Indiana was playing some of the best basketball in the league, and Cleveland was dealing with some injury issues. But I think we've now seen 2 playoff results in a row where Jarrett Allen left some to be desired. And I think that Mobley's coming into his own. You want to play him at center more in 5-out lineups. It's just not worth the cap allocation that they're committing to Jarrett Allen right now. He's on the books for 20 this season. It jumps to 28 next season. You get rid of him now so that you don't have to acquire $28 million later. You have this DeAndre Hunter contract that's big on your books. You're going to kind of be hamstrung until that comes off your books. Let Allen go. Get a couple of pieces in return on tradable contracts, smaller contracts that fill out your rotation. More wings so that you can do your dynamic backcourt with Mobley and then whatever two wings you feel are most appropriate for your opponent. As far as Jarrett Allen, I think you backfill him with some replacement level center. Just grab one in the free agent market. I mentioned Clint Capella for LA. If LA were to acquire Miles Turner, he may value a starting spot, and that would make sense for Cleveland too. You could start him at center and play him only 20 minutes a game, but your closing lineup is more 5 out with DeAndre Hunter or Isaac Okoro, Max Strus, whoever you get in this Jarrett Allen trade, which in this case from the Warriors, I have them trading Moses Moody, Buddy Hield, and their 2025 second rounder. I think you need to include a little bit more, but Moses Moody and Buddy Hield, I think, is a good return for Jarrett Allen. Moody's on a very good contract, 11.5, then 12.5, then 13.5. That's the kind of contract Cleveland should want on their books. Buddy Hield's on the books for 9 this upcoming season, 9 again the following season, but that's non-guaranteed. So that's good flexibility for Cleveland. They can waive him to duck under an apron if they find themselves close there. They just have too much money being spent right now to pay their starting center, who's a questionable fit, $30 million for 3 seasons after this next one. They have Mobley for $55 million, Donovan Mitchell $55 million, Darius Garland's in the low 40s. And then you have, as I mentioned, DeAndre Hunter in the high 20s. That's too much money to also throw a $30 million center in there. On the other side for the Warriors, they do need a center. They are looking to make a run these next 2 seasons. It's a very clear short window for them when they acquired Jimmy Butler. Kerr is going to be there for that time, Steph and Draymond as well. That's the group that's going to make a run for these next 2 years, and so it's in their interest to maximize their ceiling given that window. And they need a center. You can't play Draymond for 4 rounds and win a championship at center. You need a viable center option to go against a big team that you're more than likely going to run into throughout that playoff run. You may run into Denver. You may get a frisky San Antonio team. There's Minnesota to worry about. Houston has their big lineup that they hurt teams with. I think you need a legit 5, not necessarily to close games, but you need one on your roster to deal with those big teams. And I think Jarrett Allen makes perfect sense for them because the Warriors they shouldn't worry about the money. They don't care if they have to be a taxpayer or something in the next season or 2. And then when all these guys come off their books, what do they care if they have a $36 million Jarrett Allen on their roster? In fact, he won't even be 30 yet. And that's kind of a solid contract to have on your books in a rebuild. When he becomes an expiring contract, he'll still be a very useful player, and you could trade him for a bloated contract that some team doesn't want, collect some draft assets for being a way station for their contracts there. It sets up the Warriors both in the short term and 3 years from now. So I think it's a beautiful deal for both teams. And I think if this isn't the trade, I would definitely bet on Jarrett Allen getting traded. He's just not worth the money that they have allocated for him. Next trade, Jonathan Kuminga to the Spurs. No one's talking about this. Everyone likes these bigger targets for the Spurs, talking about Giannis. Durant's off the board now, but everyone has them doing more big game hunting. Their star is only 20. They shouldn't be looking at anybody who's 30 or older. They did the trade for Fox because you could acquire him very easily, and they're not paying anyone the max right now, so it made total sense. They needed to replace that role that they recognized they needed with Chris Paul as a veteran point guard to work with Wemby, and they solved that with De'Aaron Fox. So why do I like Jonathan Kuminga for them? He's on their timeline. He's only like 24. His value's depreciated from not playing in the Warriors' most important games this past season. So that limits his suitors, I think. Not a ton of teams with cap space. You have to engage in a sign and trade, basically. The Spurs have Harrison Barnes they could offer, which I think should interest the Warriors. I think you could even get them to throw in a player like Julian Champagny or one of their other young guys, maybe Charles Bassey, somebody like that. I think you can get an extra asset in addition to Harrison Barnes. I think San Antonio can offer a couple of second rounders because Harrison Barnes for Jonathan Kuminga, there's a lopsided in value there. Give them a couple second rounders, one more young player, and I think this trade makes sense for both sides. For the Spurs, are you going to start Harrison Barnes? You're going to start Jeremy Sochan? Both of them are not exactly high enough level starters, in my opinion, to go with your lineup, which Fox, Castle, Vassell, and Wembanyama, those are 4 fixtures, I think, in your starting lineup. To me, that 5th starter is something that needs to be addressed, and I think Kuminga would be a perfect fit offensively as a guy who plays between the rim and the three-point line, a slasher, cutter, dunker. I think he has room to improve as a defender and a rebounder. Lob threat, the kind of guy who just contributes around the basket. I think Kuminga can give them that offensive punch that they're not getting from Sochan, but the two of them together, Sochan being more of a defender, I think they make a really great combo to fit beside Vassell and Wembanyama, and they could both be on the court at the same time if you wanted to go bigger. I think it makes a ton of sense for San Antonio. As for the Warriors, it's hard to gauge the value you're going to get in a sign and trade for a restricted free agent. I think the idea of Harrison Barnes going back to the Warriors for one last run is really exciting for basketball fans. I would love to see it. He would be their wing off the bench, and they could go to lineups with Draymond at the 5 and Harrison Barnes in the game with Butler, Podziemski, and Curry if they wanted to. They have Quentin Post there as well, and with these second rounders, they could potentially make a smaller deal on the side. They would need to find another guard, but I think that would be a major piece for them as a 6th, 7th man. I think that's perhaps as good as you're going to get for Kuminga in a sign and trade. We saw with the Jimmy Butler sign and trade to Miami a few years ago. I think they got Josh Richardson and some pick, I forgot, but you don't exactly get even return in these situations, and I think Harrison Barnes would be a perfectly suitable asset to get in return when you're looking at either signing a player that doesn't want to play for you or letting them walk entirely. That's why I like this deal. Lastly, Domantas Sabonis to the Hornets. Not too long ago, I was in favor of the Kings keeping Sabonis as they take a step back after a Fox trade and retool with some younger, higher upside assets. The problem is they got nothing of value in return for De'Aaron Fox. I hated the trade that they made. I would have held on to Fox for this summer and tried to take advantage of some of this desperation that's in the marketplace. But that's water under the bridge. They got lower level, lower value picks, a bloated contract that they can't move in Zach LaVine, and they got no young players. And so this team is in a situation where they still don't have enough upside on their roster. They're not good enough to even guarantee that they can make a play-in, let alone the playoffs. So I think you're in a position where you could trade Sabonis and still be the 12th best team. And that's a sign that you have to move somebody when your team is not necessarily going to get worse standings-wise by moving them. And as far as the Hornets need to do something to become relevant again. You have LaMelo Ball under contract for some time going forward for 3 or 4 years, I think. You have Brandon Miller and some of these other young assets you drafted. You can't just wait any longer on one of them to materialize into a number 2 or number 3. I think you have to go get a legitimate second star to pair with LaMelo. So you could really invest in LaMelo and see what you have in him. Get him some valuable games under his belt. You can't just keep letting him play these seasons where the games don't matter and you're a bottom 5 team in the league. How many more years are the Hornets going to be okay doing that? So Domantas Sabonis is a perfect fit for me because LaMelo is the only big money player on the roster, so that big contract Sabonis has doesn't really hurt you. They have Mark Williams, who they've already forecasted they're willing to move off if they don't want to give him an extension. Bring in Sabonis. He would be an excellent fit with LaMelo. Try to be what the Kings were a couple years ago when they kind of had health and came out of nowhere and were a 3 seed and had that 7-game series with the Warriors. Try to get a season like that where you get an exciting offensive team, bring some interest back to Charlotte. No free agents want to go there. No one wants to get drafted there. It's just this abyss, and it's a reputation problem, and Charlotte needs to address that. And I think getting a double-double machine who is super reliable, played, I think, every game this past season. I think he's played most of his games for the last few seasons, led the league in rebounding. This is the perfect target to go acquire in an offseason where I think the Kings are going to be willing to take a step back. So what's the trade? I like a lot of these assets on the Hornets for the Kings, and that's why I think of the few suitors that are going to be there for Sabonis, the Hornets make the most sense. Mark Williams, only 24. I mentioned Hornets don't want to extend him. It'd be a decent piece for the Kings to pick up and just slide him into Sabonis' starting center spot. To James Salone, I probably mispronounced that. He was the number 6 overall pick in the last year's draft. Had a subpar rookie season. He's only 19, so no, you can't call him a bust yet. But he was a project, and maybe the Hornets just want to move off of that project and give it to somebody else, that this is better use of that value of that asset. But if you're the Kings, you love that upside. And then you start getting into the cap filler. Yusuf Nurkic, expiring $19 million, and then Grant Williams, a contract and a player that no team really wants, but he can sit on the Kings till he expires, or until you can look to trade him when he's expiring. So that's it for the players. That gets you to the Sabonis money. As for the draft compensation, the Hornets have the number 33 and 34 pick in this draft. I think you have to give the Kings one of those. I want an additional second rounder. The Hornets have a lot in 2029, so you're going to have to throw that in. And then Charlotte has 2 first rounders in 2027, a top 2 Dallas first, a top 2 protected Dallas first, and a top 14 protected Miami first. I'm going to need both of those if I'm Sacramento. And if you're the Hornets, you may still not make the playoffs, so you don't want to give them any of your picks either. Now, the Kings, with the climate being the way it is, we saw the trade for Desmond Bane. They may be able to squeeze an additional Charlotte pick out here. But I think this is somewhere around what would be an even trade for Sabonis. The Hornets get a legit starting center. Their Their starting lineup becomes LaMelo, Josh Green, Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, Sabonis. It's a really decent team. I think a play-in team for sure. The Kings, on the other hand, would have, they have Devin Carter and Keon Ellis at the point. They have Malik Monk. Zach LaVine can start at the 3. You give Keegan Murray an extension. You don't have as much pressure there. You can, in fact, give him a bigger offensive role and see what you really have. I think we still don't know what Keegan Murray is, which is a failure on the Kings' part, I think. And Mark Williams at center. With now you'll have 3 2027 firsts in addition to your own. You have moves you can make. You can trade up in that draft if you notice a player that you want. They need to find a way to acquire a new number 1. And in the meantime, mid-20s, higher upside assets on the roster. You'll still be competitive. The Kings have no business trying to be terrible. They've proven that they're not good at that. They can't rebound in a rebuild quickly. They'll miss the playoffs another 20 years if they blow it up completely. So I like this as a path for them. And I think that they just need to take a step back, find your way into the draft in the 10 or 12 spot next year. The year after that, you have all these picks. Take a 2-year hiatus from trying to compete and just be a competitive, fun team in the meantime. And see what you have in Mark Williams and Jane Salone, and, give Devin Carter more run. That's what the Kings should be doing. Any reports of them being a buyer, I think that ship sailed when they ruined the De'Aaron Fox return.